Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today is a really fun video. I'm going to be filming my October wrap-up. So basically I'm just going to be going through all of the books that I read in October and my thoughts on them, my star ratings, and whether or not I recommend them. So the first book that I read this month was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I don't have the physical copy. I read this through audiobook. I read it through Scribd. I gave this 4 stars because it was just like a really fun time for me. Basically it was about this really privileged girl from Los Angeles. She's like a micro influencer or something, and she basically throws this party and gets arrested, and her stepfather ends up sending her to this remote island where her real father is from. And at first she's like really against it. She's like counting on the days until she can go home. I'm doing something. I'm doing a thing here. Okay, she's here. She's counting on the days until she can go home. Her sister comes with her, and she's basically like, this is a punishment. This is like the worst thing that could ever happen to me, because she's out of LA and she's in this place where no one knows her and no one cares that she's rich and famous. And then she meets this fisherman who has the same job that ended up killing her real father. And the reason that her mom left this town was because of this particular type of fishing. It's like very dangerous or something, and the guy that she meets does that, and it's kind of enemies to lovers because he kind of hates her at first, but he never really hates her, which is like which happens a lot with enemies to lovers, I feel, which is why it's such like a hard trope. It's one of my favorite tropes, but it's really hard for people to do because most of the time it's like, oh, I hate you, just kidding, because that's really not what it's about. Because like the whole time he's like pining after her and stuff. That's not enemies to lovers. I like real enemies to lovers, but I did enjoy this book. I thought their chemistry was really amazing. I loved her character, the main character. I really loved her, and I loved her character progression throughout the book. I loved who she became by the end, and they kind of accomplish this goal, and her whole life changes, and it's not exactly what she thought it was going to be, but she loves it, and that's really something I love to see in books, where it's like a person who has their whole life planned out and figured out what they think that they want, and then the whole course of their life changes and they have this like passion that they never knew that they had. And that's something that I love to read because it's cool to see that really your life can change at any time, and you never really know. And you never really know where something's going to lead. So yes, I gave this 4 stars because it had a really beautiful romance. I really loved the sister dynamics. I loved the friend dynamics between the main character's love interest and his best friend, and it was just all around a really good book. It had some decent smut, some good smut, and it was really fun, so I gave it 4 stars. There is going to be a sequel, but it's not really going to be following the main characters from this book. It's going to be following the main character's sister and the other main character's best friend. They have like a flirty relationship in this book, so I think the next book will be about their relationship, which I'm excited about. I think that's coming out next year. The second book that I read this month was Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. I have read this book several times before. I read it for the first time 2 years ago. It's one of my all-time favorite books. The Infernal Devices is my favorite Shadowhunters series. It's a trilogy. It's historical fiction, but it's like historical fantasy. It's set in like the 1800s, the early 1800s in London, and there's just, I don't really know how to explain the Shadowhunters world. If you want to read this book, consider looking up all of Cassandra Clare's books and figuring out the order that you want to read them in. A lot of people recommend different ways to read them. People say, I personally read this first. This was my first Shadowhunters book when I got into Shadowhunters a few years ago, and I recommend it that way. I think chronologically this happens first, but a lot of people recommend reading them by publication date, but that's not what I recommend. But that's just me, so it's up to you, really. This is a 5-star book for me. It always has been, always will be. This is like a comfort read for me. I read this whenever I'm feeling kind of down and I just want something comfortable, because like sometimes when you're reading, everything's new, and sometimes you just want to rewatch your favorite show, rewatch your favorite movie. That's how I feel about this series. It's so warm and comfortable for me because I just know that I love it. I love the love triangle. I love the family dynamics within the Clave. I love Tessa, our main character, Will and Jem. I love all three of them, and I love their relationships together. I love them separately. I love this whole series. It's really, really comforting to me. So this time, I had never annotated it before, but this time when I read it, I annotated it. And I'm currently reading Clockwork Prince, and I'm doing the same thing where I'm annotating it. So I put like a lot of tabs in there. This is a 5-star book for me, always. The next book that I read this month was The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. I bought this book used like a year ago, I think. Maybe less than that, probably a few months ago. And I just really liked the cover, and I didn't really know anything about it. So I picked it up recently, and I really liked it. It wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I was expecting it to be a bit darker, a bit more gothic-y. It's a fantasy romance, I would say. It's pitched as like a very political book with like girl power and like this girl who's like gonna kill everyone and she's super badass. But that's not really what happened, in my opinion. I feel like it was more about the romance. I did give this 3 stars because I liked it. It was a good time. I liked the romance between the 2 main characters. But for me, it kind of fell flat in terms of what I was expecting. In the beginning of the book, her plan is to become the Shadow Queen and kill the Shadow King and take over the whole world. And that's just not really what happens. Like, she met this guy and all of a sudden all her plans changed, and actually she loves him and she wants to rule together, which is cute, and I really liked the relationship and everything, but I just feel like that's not what I was expecting from her. As a main character, she kind of changed a lot. I feel like in the beginning she was super badass and I really liked her, and by the ending I kind of felt like she was super cliche. But that's just my opinion. A lot of people really do like this book. This author has written a few other books that I really want to read. The Daughter of the Pirate King and Daughter of the Siren Queen. I really want to read those as well, and I know there is a second book coming out in this series. Once again, I don't think it's following these 2 characters. I think it's following 2 side characters. So I'm definitely going to read that one because I did have fun with this. I did think it was a good time, and that's why I gave it 3 stars. The next book I read was a graphic novel called Anyas Ghost by Vera Broskell. It looks like this. The art style was really, really cute. It's kind of super gothic-y about this girl who falls in a well and meets this ghost who can only be so far away from her bones, and then her bones accidentally get out of the well. I liked the progression of the main character. The girl, she's really selfish and self-absorbed in the beginning, and by the end she cares a lot about other people and about her friend who she's been kind of ignoring throughout the book, and she kind of realizes like what she thought she wanted is not really what she wanted, and everything seems better until you're actually in it and it's not as good as you might think. So I gave this one 3 stars as well. The next book I read was The X Hex by Erin Sterling. This was my book of the month pick for October. I read this in like one day. It's not very long and the text is kind of huge. But I really liked this book. I talked about it in another video. It's about this girl who's a witch, and her freshman year of college, she has like this fling with a warlock who's kind of like a big deal, and then he like lets it slip that he's engaged, and it just kind of ends really badly. And she gets really drunk that night, and her cousin, who's also a witch, hex him. And they don't think that it ever took because they were really drunk, and they don't think that they did it right, and they're kind of like baby witches at this point. Until they see him 9 years later, and he comes back to town, and all these like weird things keep happening with him and his magic, and he just has like this terrible, terrible luck, and everything keeps happening that's bad to him. And they start to think that maybe their hex actually worked, and it's kind of about telling him and dealing with the aftermath of seeing him again, as well as trying to undo this hex and kind of figure out what happened and save the world, essentially. So I also gave this 3 stars because it was a really fun time, and I did like the main character, and I liked the kind of romance aspect of it, but it was kind of simple and not really that deep. So definitely not a 5-star read, but I did have a good time, so I gave it 3 stars. Which is usually how it goes with romance books, that I enjoy, but I don't love, you know. I did like it though. The next book that I read was Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too by Johnny Sun. I read this during my 24-hour readathon that I posted on my channel. I talked a lot about it on there. It's about this alien who comes to Earth looking for humans to kind of like befriend and research, and he ends up finding all these animals and he thinks that they're humans because they live on Earth, and it's more than meets the eye. At the surface level it seems like really cutesy and kind of childish, but like deep down this book is really about like self-identity and learning to love yourself and accept who you are and stop trying to want to be somebody else all the time. And it's kind of like everyone feels like an alien and you're not alone. That's kind of what this book was for me. I really liked it. I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I read was Harry Potter. I was just doing a reread of this. This is The Sorcerer's Stone. I talked about why I don't really want to talk about this series on my channel that much, but I just wanted to include that I read it this month. Next book that I read was also a reread. This was Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. I love this series. It's a young adult mystery. I wouldn't say thriller that much. There are some thrilling scenes, but I think it's more just like a mystery, like a murder mystery set at a boarding school. This is like a really fun story for me. I love Stevie, who is the main character. And the first book isn't really so much about the romance that happens in the series, but I do love the romance that happens in the series. It's one of my favorite young adult romances between Stevie and one of the other characters in the book later on. But basically, Truly Devious is how a letter was signed to this really rich and famous man in the 1940s, and a day later his wife and daughter went missing and never came back. And essentially this man was blackmailed. He was misled into different directions and told where his daughter might be, and he's just been back and forth for his whole life. Essentially he went back and forth with trying to find his wife and daughter who were kidnapped from him. And he started this boarding school basically for his daughter to have friends and have people to play with all the time. And in present day, Stevie, our main character, comes to this boarding school and is set out to solve this mystery because it was never truly solved. There was a man convicted and put to death for this murder, but at the end of his life he confessed that he didn't do it. So Stevie is convinced that she can solve it. And some other things happen in present day that kind of mirror what happened at the school during this murder and kidnapping and everything. So this book is really addicting. This whole series is really addicting. I really think about these characters all the time, and I think the mystery is really well planned out from beginning to end. I think you can tell when a series has the ending in mind from the first book, and that's what I get from this book 100%. I highly, highly recommend this series. The next book I read was Dissolving Classroom by Junji Ito. This is a collection of short stories by Junji Ito. It's a manga, and I've talked before about how much I love the art style of this author. And I gave this 5 stars because it was really creepy and really scary and gross, but also really awesome. So I highly recommend this if you're into manga. It is kind of gory, kind of gross, so probably like look through it first to see if it's going to be like kind of triggering for you. If you're into gore and stuff, I think that you'd really like this. I forgot to mention I gave Truly Devious 4 stars, and I gave it 4 stars the first time I read it as well. This is like a 4-star series for me. The next book I read was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I read this as well in my 24-hour readathon, and I gave this 4 stars. This is similar to Truly Devious in that it's a young adult mystery, and it's a young girl who's really into true crime, and she sets out to solve this mystery that happened years before in her town. Basically, like 5 years ago, this girl went missing, and she was presumed dead, but her body was never found. And her boyfriend at the time killed himself and confessed over text to his dad that he was the one who killed the girl. And years later, Pippa, our main character, sets out to kind of solve this case and figure out what really happened, because she does not think that the boyfriend is the one who did it, and she does not think that the boyfriend killed himself. She thinks that there's a lot more at play here, and she's destined to get to the bottom of it. She's doing a school project on this case, and that's originally how she sets out, is to just do the school project, and she ends up teaming up with the brother of the man who allegedly killed the girl those years ago, and it's actually just like a really fun time. I think it definitely gets kind of creepy and kind of thrillery at some points. My heart was kind of racing, but I'm kind of a baby about these things. I love horror and thriller books, but sometimes I am a baby about them, and I was kind of a baby about this book because I read it in one day and I thought it was really fun, but then I was kind of scared about it. But as soon as I finished this book, I started Good Girl, Bad Blood, which is the second book in this series by Holly Jackson, because I loved the first book so much and I really wanted to keep reading about these characters and this town and all these people. And I also gave this one 4 stars because, so the first book, she's doing a capstone project, and that's what the basis of her mystery solving is. But in this book, she has started a podcast where the first season was about the mystery that happened in the first book and about everything that happened in the first book. And the second book is about a friend of hers whose brother goes missing, and she sets out to solve his case and his whereabouts because the police aren't really doing anything about it. And she's kind of well respected after finishing the investigation in the first book and getting to the bottom of what happened in the first book. So this one was also really interesting. This one is definitely scarier, and I did start the third book in this series, and already it's much darker, and I have not finished it yet. And already it's much darker, so I'm excited to keep reading about these characters. I also want to say that this series really reminds me of Pretty Little Liars, like vibes. I think the vibes are really similar to Pretty Little Liars, and the way that when you're watching Pretty Little Liars, you're kind of like infuriated. You're like, please just like tell the police, just tell your parents. And they never really do. They're just young people who think that they know better, and they end up solving and they end up putting themselves in these really dangerous situations and getting way in over their head, and then coming out the other side solving these mysteries. So if you like Pretty Little Liars, I really think that you will like this series. The last book that I read this month was Fangs by Sarah Anderson. This is a really cute graphic novel. It's about a werewolf and a vampire who fall in love, and it's really simple and really cute. It's funny, and the art style is really cool, and it's like gothic. And I always give this book 4 stars because there's not a lot of words and not a lot happens, but I really do have such a good time when I read it. I reread this. This was my second time reading it this month. I read it during my readathon, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, that's all the books that I read this month. I ended up finishing 12 books, which is kind of a lot for me, but I did a readathon and I listened to a few on audio, and I had a few days off this month, so I ended up reading a lot more than I usually do. I had a really good reading month, and I read a lot of really good books, and I'm looking forward to all the books that I'm going to read in November, so stay tuned. My next video is going to be my November TBR, so definitely check that out. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!